Hey astronauts, no longer astronomers, but astronauts, because we're going to go into space and we're going to learn more about the moon. So let's get started. Let's talk about what we did learn the last time. So the first astronauts didn't land anywhere in space. They just launched into space, went around Earth, and then they came back to Earth. So in another read aloud, we talked about how the sun and the stars are too far away and too hot to go to. We can't visit them because they're thousands of years away or they're so hot that we would melt, right? Okay, so what's something close by Earth that we could visit? It's not made out of gas, it's made out of a rock. The moon. So today's read aloud, we're going to talk about the first astronauts ever to go to the moon. Okay, so traveling to the moon would require you to be pretty brave. We talked about that in the last one. So imagine what your concerns or fears about being the first astronaut to the moon might have been. How do you think they felt going into space? What do you think some of their fears and concerns were? Do you think they would thought, is my spacecraft going to be able to handle it? What kind of danger might we face? Do you think maybe they thought, are we actually going to get there? Are we actually going to make it to the moon? Do you think maybe they thought, what are we going to find when we get to the moon? Do you think you would have traveled to the moon as an astronaut if you had all those fears? I don't know. There's a lot of unanswered questions they didn't know because nobody else had ever done it before. But today, we're going to talk about all the steps they took to find out what the trip would be like before they actually sent somebody up. So I want you to listen. Okay, listen and find out what are the steps they take in order to see if it's safe to go up to the moon before they send somebody, and who actually won the space race. Was it the United States or the Soviet Union? Now you got to listen and find out. First, we got to go through our vocabulary words. All right, friends, let's talk about exploration of the moon today. Determined, committed to or focused on a decision or a goal. I walked fast because I was determined to get to school on time. Disaster, a sudden and terrible event that is very unpleasant. The tornado was a disaster for our town. Historic, famous or important in history. Events, of the past. The astronauts went on a historic mission to the moon. Missions, tasks assigned to achieve set goals. My dad gave us all a job to do to clean up the house and said we needed to complete our missions before we could play. So think of it this way. If you've ever played Among Us, you had tasks to complete, you had missions to complete. Nervously, doing something in a worried or slightly frightened way. My grandmother watched my football game nervously because she was afraid I would get hurt. All right, friends, let's get started, shall we? Now, this man right here is John F. Kennedy. He was the president of the United States a long time ago. So who's our current president of the United States? And guys, it wasn't too long ago that we got a brand new president. Do you know who his name is? It's Joe Biden. So Joe Biden is our new president, and John F. Kennedy was a president back in 1961, where we're going to start with our read aloud. In 1961, the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, announced that the United States would send astronauts to the moon within 10 years. This seemed impossible to many people, but President Kennedy and the NASA scientists were determined to succeed, so they were committed to make it happen. Thus, they started the Apollo program in order to send people to the moon. But there was a lot of work to be done before anyone could anywhere near the moon. They didn't have much information about what it would be like to visit. Surveyor I was the first spacecraft Americans sent to the moon, but it was an unmanned spacecraft. That is, a spacecraft without any people on board. The purpose of Surveyor I was to survey or study the moon's surface. It carried equipment to study the land, temperature, and other things NASA scientists needed to know before sending people to the moon. This would help them answer questions about why or what they would discover when they landed. So it's kind of like sending a scout out to see if everything's safe. Only there was no person on it. It was just a little spacecraft that had pictures. The Apollo program involved many missions. So that's jobs that needed to be done to accomplish what they wanted to do. The first mission, Apollo 1, was a disaster. Remember, it's not a good thing. The spacecraft caught on fire before they had a chance to launch it. After that, however, the Apollo scientists had better success. First, there were unmanned missions to test various rockets and systems. So these missions would help answer questions about whether their spacecraft could handle the trip. But there's no people in it. So that way, if something bad happened, nobody was hurt. This beautiful picture shows Apollo 4, an unmanned mission to test a rocket engine. This is the type of engine that would eventually carry men to the moon. So you can see down here where the rockets are coming out, like the fire out of the rockets. And up here would be where the people would be. Next came manned missions. So these are missions that have people on them. So the spaceships would have people on them, or the spacecraft, sorry. But these astronauts did not get to go to the moon. Instead, they were practicing and testing equipment to make sure everything would work properly. This photo shows the crew of the Apollo 7 mission. So these three men right here were the ones that were in the Apollo 7. Finally, on July 16th, 1969, Apollo 11 was launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. There were 3 astronauts aboard. These right here, Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin. This picture was taken shortly before they went on their historic mission. So remember, it's historic because it was important for many people, and we remember it for many, many years. I mean, we're still talking about it today, and that was almost 60 years ago. Not that long ago, actually. It took 4 days for Apollo to travel the 239,000 miles from Earth to the moon. So do you think that seems like a long time? I mean, because we heard earlier in other lessons that it took thousands of years to travel to like stars and stuff. So 4 days isn't that bad. I lost my spot, guys, like always. During the launch, the astronauts were sitting in the very top of the rocket. Once it reached space, the part they were in broke off from the rocket and continued on toward the moon. The rocket was not needed once the ship reached outer space. So the rocket's job was done after it launched the spacecraft beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Michael Collins was the pilot for the command module, which drove the lunar module close to the moon, but did not actually land there. The lunar module, called the Eagle, was attached to the command module during the journey from the Earth to the moon. So in fact, the word lunar is used to describe anything that's related to the moon. Once they got close enough to the moon, however, the Eagle broke off from the command module and landed on the surface. So this spacecraft has 3 different parts at launch, but only the lunar module, which you see here in the picture, is actually going to land on the moon. Okay, so you have the rocket, the command center, and then the Eagle or the lunar module. Okay. The Eagle orbited the moon as Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong prepared to descend or go down and land on the surface. All right, so this is mission control. This is where NASA scientists on the ground talk to and help the astronauts in space. Okay, so meanwhile, as the Eagle reached the surface, hundreds of scientists back at mission control were watching their computers nervously. So they were worried about what might happen. There we go. To make sure everything went as planned. There is little room for error. So we can't have mistakes. Mistakes happen, then bad things happen. The NASA scientists monitored every single part of the ship, making sure every fuse wire were working properly. At the same time, people all over America were glued to their television sets, so they were watching the news, also nervously waiting to see what would happen. The Eagle was equipped with television cameras, so everyone back home could hear everything that was happening 239,000 miles away on the moon. The moon landing excited people all over the world. So remember, we had the space race with the Soviet Union. So the United States was the first country in the world to send people to the moon. It took longer than expected, but finally Neil Armstrong announced the famous words, "The Eagle has landed." Great sighs of relief and cheers went up from mission control and in living rooms across America. So that would be pretty excited. They finally landed on the moon. Now they hadn't gotten out yet, but they had landed. And if you actually look, you can see footsteps because it was taken after. Next, Neil Armstrong prepared to leave the Eagle and step out onto the moon. This picture shows what Americans back home saw on their television sets. As you can see, the picture was not very clear, but if you look closely, you can see Armstrong about to set foot on the moon's surface. Armstrong stepped down and landed on the fine, soft dust of the moon's surface. With his first step, he said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." What did Neil Armstrong mean? He meant that he himself had taken a small step from the Eagle's ladder onto the moon, but that step represented a huge leap in terms of the advances humans had made by landing on the moon. Buzz Aldrin followed Armstrong down the ladder. Both astronauts wore special spacesuits designed to endure the harsh temperatures on the moon's surface. The astronauts conducted experiments to help future astronauts and scientists. The first thing they noticed was their mobility, or how easy it was to walk and move around. The moon has very little gravity compared to Earth. Here on Earth, when you jump up, you come straight back down. Not so on the moon. When you hop up on the moon, you stay up for a few seconds and come down very slowly. So can you imagine hopping up in the air and staying there for a little bit? How far do you think you could jump? The astronauts collected samples of the moon's dust and rocks. Then they planted an American flag in the moon's soil. So explorers often plant flags to claim new land for their home. So like Columbus planted the Spanish flag when he landed in the New World. They had prepared the flag beforehand by inserting wires so that it would be firm and appear to be waving, even though there is no wind on the moon. 5 more Apollo missions landed successfully on the moon after the first mission. In the end, the Apollo astronauts brought back a total of 842 pounds of moon rock. Many of these rocks are on display in museums around the world. Apollo 17, launched in 1972, was the last mission to reach the moon. Nobody has returned to the moon since. That is bound to change as humans continue to explore outer space. Now, we may not have been on the moon recently, but we have an international space station in the moon or in space that house astronauts from all over the world. And we've actually been to Mars. Now, people haven't been to Mars, but we have sent an unmanned spacecraft to check out what Mars is like, just like they did with the moon. They sent the unmanned spacecraft to find out what it's like on the moon first. They've done that with Mars. So our space program is exploding and it is taking on a whole bunch of new things. It's so fascinating. So let's talk about what we've learned today, because we've learned a lot about what it was like to go on the moon for the first time. All right, so you heard in today's read aloud that President Kennedy, the President of the United States, was determined to do something within just 10 years. What goal did he set? He wanted to send people to the moon. All right, an unmanned mission is a task to be completed on a spacecraft with no people on it. Why did NASA send unmanned missions to the moon before manned ones? They wanted to make sure it was safe, right? What were the purpose of the unmanned missions? To study the temperature, the surface of the moon, test the rocks and the equipment. Got to make sure everything's okay. Before the unmanned missions, how did astronomers get their information about the moon? They used telescopes. All right, you learned that the Apollo 11 spacecraft had 3 parts: the rocket, the command module, and the lunar module, or the Eagle. Which part launched it into space? The rocket. Which part held the pilot who orbited the moon without landing? The command module. And which part landed on the moon? The lunar module, or the Eagle. All right, you learned that scientists at Mission Control and people at home were nervous and excited about as they watched the spacecraft approach the moon. Why do you think they were nervous? They were worried something might go wrong. Why do you think everybody was so excited? Because somebody was about to land on the moon. We were about to step foot on the moon. It's big news back then. All right, in other lessons, we learned that gravity is a force that pulls one object to another. The moon has very little gravity. What did the low gravity mean for the astronauts when they walked on the moon? They could hop in the air and stay for a few seconds, couldn't they? Yeah. All right, last question, guys. You learned that astronauts brought back over 842 pounds of moon rock. Why do you think they brought back so many rocks? They wanted to study them and find out what they're made of. Because remember, we talked about this. You can learn a lot from rocks. All right, friends, now it's your turn to be astronauts. And I want you to go into Google Classroom, answer your questions, and then turn them into me, okay? Now, I don't know what we're studying on our next lesson. Are we gonna continue on with the moon, or are we gonna talk about something else? Guess you'll have to come back and see. Bye, friends, see you tomorrow.